A very good evening to all, and many, ma'am, once again, many thanks for your brief introduction. The title for today's presentation is Medical Device Regulations Demystified and Understanding the Path to Compliance. This is the title of my presentation. Over the next 90 minutes, I would like to give a brief introduction about what is a medical device and what are all the different categories of medical devices, followed by how medical devices are classified. Apart from that, we can also discuss about the different regulating agencies worldwide that gives approval for medical devices. In addition to that, we can also have a brief discussion on the regulatory requirements for medical device approval, followed by key safety and performance standards for the approval of medical devices. In addition to that, in the recent years, software as a medical device has been a hot topic in the case of regulatory approvals and also in the research landscape. We can also have a short description or an introduction about this, followed by cybersecurity considerations for medical devices. So to begin with, in the first slide, this is the definition of a medical device. So just to keep it more interactive, can somebody could define in a simple language what would be a medical device? This is open to this query is open to the audience. Okay, since there are no volunteers, I'll just say the define what is meant by a medical device. Okay, so usually a medical device, it could be any tool, machine, material, implant, or a software. The manufacturer wants to use it for medical purposes. Okay, so when I say medical purposes, it could include either it could be, the device could be used for diagnosing a specific pathological condition, preventing a disease, monitoring a disease, or treating a disease. In addition to that, if there are some things, if we excise some samples from the human body and when we analyze it through a device, that also constitutes a medical device. Okay, when it comes to something, we in regulatory terms we call it a mode of action. How the device functions. Mostly in the case of medical devices, it is through means of a physical or a mechanical means. Okay, so this is a basic definition of a medical device. Towards my right, you can see some of the examples of medical devices that has been used in healthcare facilities, which include anesthesia machines, surgical lights, then the surgical tables and chairs, then multi-parameter monitor, defibrillator, sterilizer, respiratory ventilators, then the imaging equipment, which could include CT or MRI. These are some of the examples of a medical device. Going forward, in regulatory terms, we have something called as an intended use and indications for use. Okay, so going back to the first slide, there is a statement that states that intended by the manufacturer to be used alone or in combination for specific purposes, which could include diagnose, prevention, monitoring, prediction, prognosis, or therapy. Okay, so when it comes to intended use, it basically describes an high level purpose of the device. So something like what is the device intended for. For instance, if we are taking a glucometer, the basic use of an glucometer is it is used for measuring glucose. And basically this intended use, it usually determines the class of the device. Okay, so when we come back to indications for use, this basically describes what are the conditions that can be measured by this device. where this device will be used, the different clinical situations and different patient groups. If we see the example, it states that for monitoring glucose in adults with type 1 or type 2 diabetes. Okay, so if you see here, it gives a more in-depth information about what is the purpose of the device. Here it says that it is used for monitoring glucose in adults, and also it is used for determining the glucose levels in type 1 or type 2 diabetic subjects. Okay. Then, in addition to that, towards my right, I have put an the intended use and indications of use for a electronic stethoscope. Okay. So we all know that in the case of an electronic stethoscope, it is used to listen to heart and lung sounds inside the human body. Okay. But when it comes to the indications of use, it specifically says that this device needs to be used by a trained doctor or a specialist with the aid in detecting, diagnosis, monitoring, and treatment, and alleviation of illness, injuries, and disabilities. This gives some sort of a specific information about what the device is used for. Okay, so this is the basic difference between intended use and indications for use. And this intended use and indications for use, it basically determines the risk class of the device and also the regulatory pathway for the device. Okay, so let's now have some sort of a open discussion. Okay, so we I think most of the people have seen smartwatches which basically measures the tissue oxygenation levels or the oxygen saturation levels. Can somebody say that whether this smartwatch can be considered as a medical device? Any answers from the participants?
No, sir.
The reason?
No, it's a monitoring device. It's not a medical device.
Yeah, it monitors. Okay, so it is all based on the intended use, because when you see the user manual, it just says that it measures the oxygen saturation, but it doesn't mention any clinical condition or the use environment. Okay, so if it says that this in the smartwatch, it measures oxygen saturation in a clinical environment and for the detection of specific pathologies, in those conditions, that becomes a medical device. Okay, so just to summarize, this intended use and indications of use basically it determines the class of the device and the regulatory pathway of the device. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. If you see, this is some sort of a class 2 medical device, which is basically used for detection of lesions in the gastrointestinal system, and basically it is a software. Okay, so if you see the indications of your use for the device, it clearly mentions that this is designed to aid endoscopists. Then in addition to that, it says that on whom it will be used. So it represents the target patients and environment, which says that undergoing endoscopic screening. So usually endoscopic screening, it is done in a clinical environment. When it comes to the indications for what purpose it is used for, it is used as an assistance in the detection of colonic mucosal lesions. When it comes to the operating principle, it says that it is some sort of a computer assisted software. In addition to that, it also mentions that the limitations associated with the device, which means that it is only a white light imaging and it is not used for replacing the clinical decision making. Okay, so this is an example for indications of use. Okay, then a question will arise: what is not a medical device? As our one of our participants told that a smartwatch, which is basically a fitness tracker, it is not a medical device. Okay, so these type of fitness trackers, this will be usually classified under the category of general wellness devices. Okay, So in addition to that, when it comes to cosmetic items, educational materials, then some sort of a software, general laboratory equipment, and household equipments like heating pads and massages, they will always come under the category of these things are not medical devices. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. Again, I want some feedback from the participants. Daily, when we wake up, we use a toothbrush. Okay, so basically, this is a manual toothbrush. I would be interested to know if this is a medical device. Any answers from the participant side? Okay. So, if you see in the European Union and India, this toothbrush it is not considered as a medical device. Okay, so generally it is considered as a general consumer product. Okay, but when it comes to US, you can see that there is a definition of a manual toothbrush which says that a manual toothbrush is a device composed of a shaft either with natural or synthetic bristles at one and intended to remove adherent plaque, food, and debris from the teeth and reduced tooth decay. Okay, so based on this definition, in US, the conventional toothbrush it is considered as a medical device. Okay, so in addition to that, towards my right, if you see, this is the FDA product code for toothbrush, which is EFW. In addition to that, this is considered as a class 1 device, and based on this regulation 872.6855, which is present here, this defines the definition of a toothbrush as a medical device. Okay, but in the case of European Union and India, this is not considered as a medical device. Okay, so basically, a device which is common in other geographies could be considered as a medical device in other geographies. This all depends on the regulator and what is the definition of a medical device in a specific geography. Okay, so now we are all familiar with medical devices, but as a regulator, we should know what could be the difference between a device, drug, and a combination product. Okay, so when it comes to the medical device, we have something called as a primary mode of action. Okay, which means that how the device achieves this intended purpose. Okay, so when it comes to the medical device, if you see the definition, it says that the product does not achieve its primary intended action not by means of chemical metabolic means. Okay, so which means that if the device achieves the intended purpose either mechanically, physically, or electronically or structurally, that is called as a medical device. And when it comes to the examples of medical devices, pacemaker, surgical gloves, and MRI scanner, these are examples of medical devices. Okay, so when it comes to drug, here this drug it achieves its intended purpose by means of a some sort of a chemical interaction, which could include either which could be a pharmacological effect, metabolism, or absorption. Okay, so when some compound achieves its intended purpose by means of these three methods, this is called as a drug. Okay, so one of the example commonly used drugs is paracetamol, which is used to treat treat fever. Okay, then there is something called as a combination product. Okay, so we are all familiar with what I can say, pre-filled insulin syringes. Okay, so there what happens is the mode of action, which means that the intended purpose, in order to control the glucose levels, we are injecting insulin. Okay, so there the primary mode of action is by means of the drug, but the intended purpose is achieved by means of an injection, which is a medical device. Okay, so depending upon the mode of action, how this is achieved. Here in the case of pre-filled insulin syringes, the mode of action is achieved by means of the drug. Okay, so usually it is called as a drug device combination, and it falls under the category of combination products. Okay, so if your device is a combination product, then most probably you need to get approval for both your drug and the medical device. Okay, so in the case of European Union, if it is a drug, you have to get approval from the European Medical Devices Agency, and if it is a syringe, then you have to get approval from sort of a notified body who approves the medical devices. Okay, so this is a basic difference between device, drug, and a combination product. Okay, so in addition to that, some of the examples of combination products include there is something called as a drug eluting stents. Okay, so we all know that the basic purpose of a stent. Again, I want to put forward a question to the participants. What is the purpose of a stent?
To keep the blood vessel open.
Yeah,
Make it like
to be more precise, when someone has a blocked coronary artery, it is designed for expanding the inside of the arteries and holding them in that position, so that it will allow normal blood flow. Okay, so this is the purpose of a stent. Then how this drug eluting stent is different from a normal stent. Okay, with respect to the drug eluting stent, it basically has some sort of a bare metal stent which provides the mechanical support, which just keeps the what I would say here, the coronary artery open. In addition to that, the drug which is provided in the stent, it usually prevents excessive scarring of the tissue, and this type of drug which is present in the stent, it is released over a period of months and weeks. In addition to that, when we are using a drug eluting stent, it reduces the chances of this artery narrowing again. Okay, so this is the purpose of a drug eluting stent. And when we are using a drug along with the stent, it becomes a combination product, because it serves a dual purpose. One is it allows unrestricted flow of blood when the stent is inserted. In addition to that, it also prevents excessive scarring of the tissue, which is the purpose of the drug. Okay, so this is one example of a combination product. In addition to that, the other example will be pre-filled insulin syringes. Okay, so these two are examples of combination products. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, there is something called as borderline products. Okay, so which means that in the case of a borderline product, the definition is where the rules of medical devices do not apply, or we are not sure that if the device will fall under a category of a medical device or a medicinal product, which could be a drug. Okay, so usually this type of uncertainty, it usually comes from the fact that the manufacturer claims an intended purpose which is not clear to the regulator, to something like FDA, and it is also dependent upon the primary mode of action. In addition to that, the product category overlaps with another regulated sector. Okay, so these we are calling it as borderline products. Okay, so let's see an example for a borderline product. Okay, so when it comes to medical devices, we all know that the primary effect is by means of any physical or mechanical means. That is an example. That is how the primary mode of action is achieved in the case of medical devices. While in the case of medicines, drugs, or pharmacological products, the primary mode of action is achieved by means of pharmacology.
ಗೊತ್ತಾ ಫಿಲಿಮ್ ಬಯೋಫಿಲಿಮ್ಸ್ FTR ಅಲ್ಲ ಅವರಲ್ಲಿ ಇದೆ
Hello.
ATR ಅಲ್ಲ ಜಸ್ಟ್ ನಾರ್ಮಲ್ KBR ಕಲೆಕ್ಟ್ ಮೆಥಡ್ ಆತ ಹೇಳ್ಕಳ್ಸಿದ ಹುಡುಗರಿಗೆ
Okay, sorry, sir, there was some disruption. So let's see an example for a borderline scenario. Okay, so let's put it in terms of eye drops. Okay, so this eye drops, it could be of two types. One is lubricating eye drops, and the other one is eye drops that could reduce the redness in the eyes, which is the second one. Okay, so in the case of lubricating eye drops, if we see the example, adapte artificial tears, and this has an approval number of N16993. So this was approved in the United States. And if you see the definition of this regulation, 886.5928, this is basically considered as a class 2 medical device. Okay, but when it comes to the same eye drops that is used with an active ingredient of a certain pharmacological compound, and which is used to relieve redness in the eyes, or which is used to treat the infections in the eyes, this is classified as a drug. Okay, so when it comes to, so but the product is eye drops, so depending upon the intended mode of action and intended use, this could either fall in the category of a medical device or a drug. Okay, so this is one of the more common example for borderline products. Okay, then when it comes to different categories of medical devices, we can see that based upon the regulator and based upon the geography, the devices are classified as low, medium, high risk devices. Okay, so in the case of US FDA, the classification comes from class 1, which is of low risk. Moving to the higher class, these are class 3 devices. Okay, the examples for low risk, which is class 1 devices, include or conventional thermometer and stethoscope. These are considered as class 1 devices. When we move on to class 2 devices, these are medium risk devices, and the examples include the ultrasound machine and the blood pressure monitoring system. Okay, when it comes to high risk devices, we can see that the drug eluting stents and the pacemakers, they constitute high risk devices. Okay, so depending upon the risk class of the device, the documentation which is needed and the regulatory pathway, it is going to be stringent. For instance, when it is the case of low risk devices, mostly they don't need any documentation, just a self certification would be suffice. But when it comes to high risk class devices, possibly the regulator could, if it is a new type of device, the regulator might ask for clinical data, and the regulatory requirements are more stringent. Okay, so these are this is how basically a medical device is classified generally. Okay, but when it comes to India, medical devices are fall into 4 different categories, which include class A, class B, class C, and class B. Then when it comes to the European Union, we have class 1, class 2A, class 2B, and class 3. And even in the case of class 1, we have 2 or 3 different categories, which is class 1S, which is sterile, class 1 M, which is measuring instruments, and class 1 R, which is reusable instruments. These, though it is class 1 instruments, when it is measuring or a sterile or a reusable device, they have a bit stringent regulatory path. Okay. So this is all about how medical devices are classified in general. Okay. So until this point, I would like to pause here for a moment, and if you have any queries, please let me know. Any questions from the participants? Okay, we will move on to the next slide. So this slide basically explains what are the different phases in new medical product development. Okay, so as academic researchers, we usually apply for funding. So we usually what we do is we usually take the extension of our PhD work for applying to funding agencies. Okay, but when it comes to corporate environment or medical device companies, it doesn't work that way. Okay, so they usually have 5 phases of medical device development, and the first phase includes opportunity and risk analysis. Okay, so in this phase, usually the researchers and the business people, they sit together and discuss. First, they discuss whether the idea makes business sense, which means that they look into the market competition and the finances involved in the development of that medical device. Okay, so in addition to that, they should sit together and check the early risks associated with the medical device, which could include technical or the regulatory pathway or legal and intellectual property issues. Okay, so which means that I am also developing a medical device, and there is also a competitor who is also developing the same medical device for the same intended purpose. And when we are applying for intellectual property rights, there should not be any conflicts, because everything involves money, right? So they usually checks the early risks associated with the development of a medical device. In addition to that, during this first phase, the company people also decide if the idea is worth moving forward. Okay, so these things constitute the phase 1 of the medical device development. Then when it comes to phase 2, it is something like concept and feasibility. Okay, so basically here the medical device companies build early concepts, something like on what operating principle the device works. In addition to that, they also develop simple prototypes of the device to check if the idea is workable and feasible. Okay, then in addition to that, they also get feedback from customers, which include medical doctors, nurses, and patients as an input, and review the user specifications. For instance, if I'm developing a say weighing machine, okay, so this has to be portable, and this that has to be of lightweight. So these are some customer inputs, and based on the specific medical device and specific feedback from medical doctors and patients, they put something called as user specifications for the medical device. Okay, so during this phase 2, they basically confirm the design that is feasible, and usually they plan the project outlines, timelines and outlines in the phase 2. Okay, when it comes to phase 3, this includes design verification and validation. Okay, so here what they do is they develop a working prototype in phase 3, and based on specific feedbacks, they reiterate it and they make sure that the device meets the requirements, which means that the device achieves the intended purpose. For instance, if it is a pulse oximeter, they make sure that that measures the tissue oxygenation levels, and also they make sure that the device works safely. Okay, so in addition to that, what they do is they prepare regulatory submission documentation with the required data. Okay, then when it comes to phase 4, they do a final validation of the device. They complete all the design files and risk reviews. They finalize what could be the brand name, labeling requirements, and launch plans. And in this phase, they try to get the regulatory approval from the health agency for marketing the medical device. Okay, so but the medical device product development process does not stop once you launch the product. In addition to that, what they do is in phase 5, they launch the product with their sales team. In addition to that, they monitor the performance of the product in real world, get feedback from the users, which include medical doctors and the patients, and they make improvements. This, in regulatory terms, we call it as post-market surveillance. Okay, which means that we get feedback from the end users, and we keep upgrade or updating the product accordingly based on how the device performs in the real time in the market. Okay, so these are 5 phases associated with the development of a medical device. So moving on to the next slide, as clinical researchers, we develop products which is intended for identifying specific pathological conditions or treating specific conditions for patients. Okay, so in between, we have to understand why medical device regulations are needed. Any inputs from the audience or the participants, like why we need to have medical device regulations?
Like Helsinki declarations or ethical compliances, or the essential need for
Basically,
including the
this
patients.
ethical approval is needed prior to the launch of the product, and if your product is new, we need to get approval from the health authorities stating that the device is safe for human use, and we want to test it on human subjects to check if this device achieves the intended purpose. Okay, so I'll give you some scenarios as to understand why medical device regulations are needed. Okay, okay. When it comes to the first incident, it is Terac 25 radiation overdoses, and this what I could say, this type of untoward incidents, it happened in the 1980s and in USA and Canada. Okay, so when it comes to Terac 25, this was a radiation therapy machine which was used to treat cancer. Okay, but there was some sort of a software bug, and there were some poor safety designs in the interlocks that prevents radiations from reaching the patients when it is not intended. Okay, so what happened was, because of the software bugs and poor safety design, the patients received a large amount of radiation overdoses, and because of this, several people were injured and died. Okay, so this scandal showed that how the medical devices could be dangerous without proper testing and safety checks. Okay, so when it comes to the second scandal, this is called as PIP scandal. Here, what happened was this happened in the European Union in the 2010. Okay, so here this in PIP scandal, what happened was these are basically breast implants intended for women. But what happened was basically they were using silicone implants. Okay, but there was a small mistake that they made. Okay, so in order to make it cheaper and in order to have more profits, they used industrial grade silicone instead of a medical grade silicone. Okay, so because of this, what happened was these industrial grade silicone, it was not tested properly and they had a high chance of breaking and leaking. Okay, so what happened was thousands of women were affected worldwide, and it was one of the most well-known scandals, medical device scandals in the European Union, and this is one of the reasons why they came up with the new regulations in the European Union in 2017. Okay. In addition to that, in US, there was something called as a Dalkin Shield IUD. IUD stands for intrauterine device. Okay. So in this scandal, what happened was this Dalkin Shield, it is basically a birth control device which was inserted into the uterus. Okay. But the problem, what happened was this IUD device, it had a design flaw that made bacteria and other microorganisms to enter into the uterus and cause severe infections, and in some cases it resulted in deaths. Okay, and this was also one of the most infamous medical device failures in the history of medical devices. Okay, then when it comes to this one, Medtronic Sprint Fidelis leads. Here, what happened was this is some sort of an implanted defibrillator to the heart. But what happened was the leads were prone to breaking, and this could cause the defibrillator to misfire at inappropriate times. Okay, so which means that the defibrillator was triggered unnecessarily, and this was not at all needed because at that point, at a specific time, this triggering was not needed. Okay, so the leads need to be recalled, and removing them was risky, and this put the patients at risk. Okay, then finally, very recently, there was a scandal related to one of the divisions in Philips, which is Philips Respironics. Here, what happened was this Philips Respironics CPAP and BiPAP. These are basically sleep apnea machines, and what happened was there was some sort of a tube which is going into the patient's mouth, and what happened was the foam which is inside the tubes, they could break apart, which means that some sort of tiny particles or chemicals from the foam could be inhaled by the patients, and they could cause a potential harm to their lungs. Okay, so this was one of the recent scandals which occurred in 2021, and the regulator, which is FDA back in the United States, they were asked to recall all these devices. Okay, so because of this scandal, what happened was they lost almost Philips Respironics division. They lost almost 90% of their market share in this Respironics business. Okay, so based on these 5 different incidents, we can understand that why medical device regulations are needed. Okay, so in a nutshell, the crux of these incidences, or whatever may be the medical device, it has to be proved safe and effective for human use. Okay, so in order to prove something safe and effective for human use, we need medical device regulations or something like laws which determines how a medical device has to be manufactured and what are the different types of tests that needs to be performed. So how a medical device needs to be introduced into the market. So for everything we have regulations based upon the geography. Okay, so this slide we understand that why medical device regulations are basically needed. Okay, then when it comes to the regulatory bodies or the agencies who give approvals or control medical devices. Okay, so if you see the first one, this is Food and Drug Administration. This is the regulator back in the United States. Then when it comes to Canada, it is Health Canada. Then, when it comes to Japan, it is the Pharmaceuticals and the Medical Device Agency, which controls the approvals for drugs and medicines. When it comes to China, it is NMPA, which stands for National Medicinal Products Administration. When it comes to Singapore, it is Health Sciences Authority. In India, the medical device and drugs are approved by an agency called as Central Drug Standard Control Organization. When it comes to Australia, it is TGA, which stands for Therapeutic Goods Administration. When it comes to Switzerland, it is the Swiss Medic. When it comes to UK, it is MHRA, which regulates medicines and medical devices. But when it comes to European Union, we call something called as notified bodies. Okay, in European Union, there is no government agency which gives approval for medical devices, but we have some agencies called as notified bodies, which is approved by the regional governments in the European Union member states, and they give approval to medical devices. So some of the examples for notified bodies include BSI, TUV, and SGS. Okay, so these are some of the regulatory bodies who control medical devices in different geographies. Okay, then in the next slide, we have to understand why these regulations are not harmonized over, say, across the world. If we go back, when we considered this toothbrush, it is considered as a medical device in the US, while in the European Union and other geographies, that comes under the category of general consumer products. Okay, so one of the reasons why regulations differ across different geographies is different health priorities. Then, in addition to that, varied healthcare systems, which means that the approval routes it reflect the clinical workflow, different data and data requirements and evidence expectations. In addition to that, the approval pathways, the surveillance intensity, and the laws are also bit different. In simple words, if you're a developed economy, the regulations are very stringent. And if you are an underdeveloped country, the regulations might be bit little, so that you can market your devices in those countries. Okay. Another regulatory pathways that I have noticed is that in the case of underdeveloped countries, what happens is, if you have approvals for high risk devices in certain geographies like US or in the European Union or in Australia or in Japan, the regulatory pathway it becomes a bit easier. Okay, so this is why regulations differ across different geographies, and the pathway are also different depending upon the geography. Okay, then I would like to pause here for a moment and let me know if you have any queries.
Sir, if we wanted to get an ethical approval for any small product, where we need to approach, sir, as of now?
No, you have to approach your institutional ethics committee, either in the place where you work or in the hospital where the measurements are taken.
Okay. if it is going to be a product for patenting or something, if that is sufficient, sir?
Yeah, that should be sufficient. From the patent IP, I'm not sure, but from the regulatory perspective, it has nothing to do with the regulator has nothing to do with um testing your medical devices on patients.
Okay, so from the hospital we are going to get the approval form. Okay.
Yes, yes, yes.
It is going to be our own format, no sir, or is there any standard formats with which we should follow?
I think based on India medical device regulations and ICMR, there are specific forms and regulations that needs to be followed, ma'am.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so so now we understand what is meant by a medical device. Then we also understand how medical devices are classified. Then what are all the different pathways by which the medical device is manufactured in an industry. Okay, so now you have a medical device, and I want to understand what would be the regulatory requirement for medical devices. Okay, so for the first one is the manufacturer must show that the device is safe and effective for human use. That is the first criteria. Then the second criteria is the manufacturer must provide details regarding the device achieves the intended purpose. In addition to that, all the risks associated with the medical device have been identified, and those hazards have been mitigated. Okay, so in addition to that, we need to have documentation for design verification and validation of the device. In addition to that, we need to have a proper quality management system, so that everything is done according to the quality manual. And when it comes to the new devices or higher class of devices, the manufacturer needs to provide clinical evidence or performance evaluation data to prove that the device is achieving the intended purpose and it is safe for human use. Okay, so at this point, I would like to give a practical tricky scenario that we faced with the medical device manufacturer. Okay, so this company was based in US, and they were basically manufacturers of orthopedic and spine implants. Okay, and basically the materials include polymers and metallic materials, something like titanium. Okay, so they already had approvals from US FDA. They were also approved by the European Union notified bodies. In addition to that, they also had approvals in Australia and Singapore. Okay, but this manufacturer, they wanted to get approval in Japan, but we faced a regulatory bottleneck. Okay, but the problem that we faced was, as I mentioned, that these products were approved in the different geographies, and these implants were of different sizes. Okay, so when we had initial interactions with PMDA, the regulator required us how these type of implants could be applicable for Japanese people, because they wanted to take into account the Japanese physique, which means that usually the people from Japan, they are of very short. But while in the case of US, the people mostly are of 6 feet. Okay, so which means that the implants which are approved in the other geographies, they had different sizes, and the regulatory agency wanted the company to do clinical trials in Japan to prove that these implants, which is of different sizes, could fit Japanese physique. Okay, but on the other side, from the company's perspective, they always wanted to avoid going through clinical trials because when we do clinical trials in Japan or in other geographies, it is also quite expensive, and getting approval for clinical trials is quite cumbersome. Okay. So this is one of the regulatory bottleneck that we faced with the implants. Okay. And there was also, I would like to tell another one practical scenario. And there was one company which was based in Hyderabad, I think. Okay. So they were basically using thermography images from the face, and they were trying to detect diabetes, hypertension, and other pathologies by means of some sort of proprietary image processing algorithms, by means of images acquired from thermography. Okay, but there was a requirement from the manufacturer. Okay, so when we say that the software or the medical device, it detects a pathological condition, then automatically it becomes a medical device. Okay, here in this case, the manufacturer did not want to classify it as a medical device, because when you classify it as a medical device, it is quite expensive, and the regulatory pathway is also quite cumbersome, because we didn't have any similar devices in the market. Okay, from the manufacturer's point of view, they wanted to classify it as a general wellness product. Okay, what happened was, we felt that since they say that based on specific parameters, they were able to give information related to whether the patient is diabetic or not, what would be the status of hypertension, because these are all clinical claims. Okay, so when we talked with FDA in a couple of meetings, the FDA told that at this point of time, we cannot say that this could be classified as a general wellness product, but you can always market it as a general wellness product. Then, if something goes wrong, the manufacturer will be held accountable. So that was the feedback that we got from FDA, because off the record, the reviewers from FDA told that this could not be classified as a general wellness product, because there are clinical claims in the intended use and indications of use for the device. Okay, so these are some of the regulatory bottlenecks that I have personally experienced in a real-time scenario. Okay, so when it comes to the first requirement, when we do medical device submission to a regulator, the first one we need to have is quality management system. Okay, basically in the case of medical devices, we have to understand why a quality management system is needed. Okay, so when it comes to quality management system, the quality management system for medical device manufacturers is ISO 13485. Okay, this is something similar to ISO 9001, but when it comes to ISO 9001, this is applicable across all the companies. Something like even educational institutions also have a ISO 9001. But when it comes to ISO 13485, this is specifically required for medical device manufacturers, and sometimes medical device consulting firms. They also get this ISO 13485. Okay, so one of the important reasons for having a QMS is basically a QMS. It keeps the patients safe by making sure that the medical device is designed and built to work properly before it reaches the home or a hospital. Okay, that is the first requirement. Then, when it comes to the second point, it controls how the medical devices are built, designed, and tested, and make sure that all the risks are addressed early, and the QMS also makes sure that the suppliers are reliable, and the product is made the same way at each time. So this is something like we can say that the analogy could be a recipe for a cake. Okay, so for instance, if there is a bakery A which is in Kelambakam, or let's take KFC. So there is a KFC branch which is in Kelambakam, and there is another branch in KK Nagar where I stay. And if you see the taste of the fried chicken, it is the same. So the reason is they have established a set of procedures which make sure that the product is made the same way, which means that they have a set of SOPs on how to do the fried chicken, and they also make sure that they have a set of procedures, who is from which vendor they are getting the raw materials. So that's why a QMS is needed in the case of medical devices. Okay, in addition to that, the third requirement is usually this quality management system is required by regulators, which means that the manufacturers must have a documented systems in place to sell their medical devices across different geographies. Okay, so these are some of the points why a QMS is needed for medical device manufacturers. Okay, in addition to that, when we look into the structure of a QMS, usually the quality manual, it is some sort of a triangular structure with different components. Okay, so usually this quality manual, it comes in the top, followed by standard operating procedures, forms and templates, and records. It usually comes in the bottom of the QMS structure. Okay, so when it comes to the quality manual, this is something like a blueprint. This is something like a blueprint which gives an overview of the quality manual. In addition to that, this quality manual explains what are all covered in the QMS, and it also describes how the medical device manufacturer manages quality. In addition to that, it also lists down the set of procedures and how it fits into the medical device manufacturing process. Okay, in simple words, it is something, the quality manual is something like an instruction book which says that how the whole of the quality systems work. Okay, then the next one is standard operating procedure. Okay, so which means that usually in corporate companies or in well established institutions, they have something called as a standard operating procedure. Okay, so whenever a person joins a new company, they say that they you have to complete a certain module, something like cybersecurity awareness. Then in order to get familiarized with the company, they have certain standard operating procedures. For instance, what are all the documents that needs to be submitted, something like that, and what would be the exit process. So if I resign, what are all the tasks that needs to be performed. So those things are covered under standard operating procedure. And when it comes to medical device manufacturing companies, usually the document control, design control, and if there is some sort of a feedback from the end users of medical devices, how we handle it, that those things are all covered under standard operating procedures. When it comes to forms and templates, these are optional, but these forms and templates are commonly kept in medical device manufacturing firms to keep the work consistent and organized. Okay, then when it comes to the records, usually these records are something like filled out forms and these prove that the activities were done correctly. Okay, so some of the examples for these records, it include minutes of meeting using a design review, then inspection results, then batch manufacturing records. These are some of the examples of records. Okay, so which means that when we are a medical device manufacturer, starting from the conception of the idea and how the product is released into the market, everything is documented. Okay, so this is the basic objective of QMS. When it comes to the next requirement, it is basically design controls. Okay, so design controls is something how the medical device is manufactured, starting from the user needs to when it leads to the market. Okay, so the first thing in design controls is user needs. Okay, so the user, for instance, let's take an example of a pulse oximeter. Okay, so I go to the end users, basically patients and the medical doctors. I want to check with them what they actually want. Okay, so one of the user needs from the end users, it could be they want to have a small device that can quickly tell the oxygen level and heart rate. Okay, this is one of the requirement, and it should be painless and easy to read. Okay, so this is something like hearing and hearing from the medical doctors, patients or nurses what they want to do with the device or what the device can do. Okay, so this is called as user needs. First one. When it comes to the requirements, it is something like what could be the specifications for the medical device. In regulatory terms, we call it as design inputs. Okay, so considering our example of a pulse oximeter, one of the design inputs or requirements, it could be it should measure oxygen saturation with an accuracy of plus or minus 2% accuracy, and it must show the results within 5 seconds. And the pulse oximeter, it should fit the average adult finger. Okay, so these are some of the parameters for design inputs. Okay, then when it comes to design outputs or specifications, this basically gives an introduction about the final description of the product, which means that basically how the design looks like, exact shape and dimensions of the clip which is present in the pulse oximeter, the type of LEDs used in the pulse oximeter, how the pulse sensors reads and processes the data in the pulse oximeter. In addition to that, the battery life and the display layout also it could be included in the design outputs. Just to put it in a nutshell, these specifications define the pulse oximeter design in detail. Okay, then if you see, there is something called as verification and validation. Okay, so when it comes to verification, it says that did we design the product right? Okay, then when it comes to validation, this is something like whether the device achieves the intended purpose. So this is basically the difference between design, verification and validation. And if you see all the stages, it is usually an iterative process, which means that at every stage of the process, you design something and you do some sort of performance tests or do have internal discussions with the concerned stakeholders, and if there is some feedback from the concerned stakeholders, reiterate the design multiple times before arriving at the final medical device. Okay. When it comes to the regulatory requirements, there is something called as design history file, device master record. This has to be kept by the manufacturer, and it is also required by the regulators during the medical device audits. Okay. So these are some of the requirements in the case of design controls. So moving forward, we have something called as risk management. Okay. So in the case of risk management, what happens is, let's consider the example of a pulse oximeter. So there is a pulse oximeter, and the risk of misreading is high. So which means that the misreadings could happen under two scenarios. One is if the LEDs are not bright enough, and if there is some sort of motion artifacts infiltrate. Okay. So because of these two reasons, there is a risk of misreading in pulse oximeter. In addition to that, what happens if the end user has a high risk of misusing the equipment? Okay. So in those cases, the medical device manufacturers have a file called as risk management, and this basically describes what are all the possible hazards that could go with the medical device, and what could be the harms associated with the medical device, and what are all the control measures or risk mitigations that the medical device manufacturers has done in order to reduce that harm. So all those things are what I would say, documented in a file called as a risk management file, and this is based on the standard ISO 14971. Okay. In addition to that, this risk management process, this continues throughout the entire life of the medical device, and this risk management does not stop once the device is sold. Okay. So what happens is, once the medical device has been put into the market, the manufacturers, they collect data in the form of complaints, service reports, and new clinical information. Okay. So based on these complaints, service reports, or new clinical information, if new risks shows up, what they do is, they again go back to their risk management file and evaluate how this risk occurs and what could be the control measures to evaluate or to remediate those risks. Okay. So this is all about risk management. Okay. In simple words, I was mentioning about hazards. Okay. So the first thing in risk management is, you have to start find by possible hazards. Okay. So if it is something like a electromedical device, so there could be a possible of line voltage and leakage currents that could be harmful to the patients. In addition to that, there could also be some sort of electromagnetic interference, and this could be classified under electrical hazards. Okay. So if you're working with biological samples or some sort of chemicals, so there could be some sort of chemicals that could be harmful to the human body. In addition to that, if you are using some sort of biological samples, there could be also some infections. Okay. This will constitute biological hazards. Then when it comes to operational hazards, what will happen if I incorrectly use the instrument, or what will happen if there is an incorrect measurement? So these things are documented under risk management and how the hazards are identified, what are all the risk, how the risk evaluation is done, and how the those hazards and risks are controlled. These things are documented in the risk management file. Then, when it comes to the third requirement, it is the usability engineering. Okay, so in the case of usability engineering, this could be something like, let's consider an illustrative example. So, okay, so this is an example of a face mask. Okay, so something like a disposable mask. So this could be used by the general public and healthcare professionals to prevent the spread of infections. Okay, so this is in the case of a normal use. Okay, and what happens when the end user touches the outside of the face mask? This is a use error. Then what happens when the end user unintentionally places the mask below the nose? Okay, then what happens when this disposable face mask is used by a surgeon in an operating environment? This is something like an abnormal use. Okay, so when it comes to the second and the third scenarios, these situations we are familiar a couple of years back during our COVID days, because we see people, they usually place the mask below their nose, and they usually unintentionally touch the outside of the face mask, that could risk infections. Okay, so in the case of usability engineering, it could consider who the end user is and where the device is used. In addition to that, what could be the risks associated with the use errors? Okay, so if you take the first scenario, there is just a second. There is some sort of a glucose measuring device, which is towards my left. It is the end user. It could be a patient or a general public. And when it comes towards my right, there is a clinician sitting, and the device could be used in a different way by a healthcare professional, which means that how the device is used, it is dependent upon the end user. And basically this usability engineering, it determines what could be the hazards that could be developed depending upon the end user of the medical device. And the standard for usability engineering measurements is IEC 62366. Okay, then in the case of usability engineering, they do two things. One is called as formative evaluation, and the other one is summative evaluation. Okay, so in the case of formative evaluation, what will happen is this happens during the development of the product, and this could be done by means of questionnaires. And usually this type of formative evaluation is done on the prototype of the device, and it is iterative during the design and development of the medical device. Okay, so then there is something called as summative evaluation. So at the final stage of the device, I have a final finished product, and people determine how this design performs after the major developmental steps. Okay, so in the case of summative evaluation, it is usually done on the final finished product, while in the case of formative evaluation, that usually happens in the case of during the design phase, and this is usually done in the case of prototypes, which is for uh, formative evaluation. Okay, then when it comes to the fourth point, This is called as biocompatibility. Okay, so for instance, I'm having some sort of a medical device, and this comes in contact with the human body. Okay, so this biocompatibility, it ensures that the medical device is safe when it touches or enters the human body. For instance, if it is some sort of a stethoscope, it usually comes in contact with the human body for a specific period of time. Then enters the human body. It says that, for instance, if we are using pacemakers and orthopedic or spine implants, or basically which is implants, they remain in the body for a specific period of time or an indefinite period of time. Okay, so these biocompatibility tests, it makes sure that the device does not cause any harmful reactions, irritation, or allergies, or any toxic effects. Okay, so the regulators require proof that the device is not causing any adverse events when it is interacting with the human body. Okay, so when it comes to the case of biocompatibility, it usually requires different types of tests. We can see that chemical characterization, cytotoxicity, sensitization, irritation, pyrogenicity. These are all the different types of tests, and the requirements for these different types of tests, it depends upon the first parameter. What is the body contact associated with the device? For instance, whether if it comes in contact with the skin or mucosal membrane, or whether it comes in contact with tissue, bone, or dentin. Then in addition to that, something like surface devices, externally communicating devices, and implant devices. For instance, if it is surface devices, okay, when it comes to surface devices, this usually comes in contact with the surface of the skin. Something like the stethoscope, which is kept on the human chest, that is called as a surface device. Okay, when it comes to externally communicating devices, we all know that these specific implants, when it is put inside the human body, we have different types of devices. For instance, if we are putting a screw inside the human body, we need to have some sort of a screwdriver in order to put that implant in a specific place. Okay, so that is done by means of a screwdriver. Then that becomes an externally communicating device. Okay, so when it comes to implantable devices, the implants, which is either it is made up of a polymer or a metal, that becomes an implant. For instance, if it is a pacemaker, we also have pacemakers which could be implantable. Okay, so these are some of the examples for implantable devices. Okay, so in addition to that, how long the device is in contact with the human body. Okay, so this also determines what could be the biocompatibility test that needs to be performed. Okay, so when it comes to the case of say stethoscope, so this usually comes in contact with human skin, and the contact duration is it is less than 1 day. Okay, so it is obvious that the doctor is not going to keep the stethoscope with the human body for more than 1 day. Okay, so if that is the case, cytotoxicity, sensitization, and irritation, so these are the basic tests that needs to be performed. Okay, so if it is an implant, and if it comes in contact with human blood, okay, and if the contact duration is more than 30 days, which means that this is going to be permanently implanted in the human body, then you have to perform all the biocompatibility tests, starting from chemical characterization to carcinogenicity. Okay, so this is some information about biocompatibility. Then when it comes to a medical device, for instance, if I'm using a pulse oximeter, okay, So I have to make sure that this is in compliant with electrical safety standards. Okay, so the basic electrical safety standard is IEC 60601-1. Okay, so this is applicable to all the electromedical devices, irrespective of the nature of the device or irrespective of the intended purpose. Okay, so this is basically called as a general standard because it is applicable to all the medical devices. Okay, when it comes to the second one, we call it as collateral standards. Okay, so when it comes to collateral standards, these are extra requirements that could be applicable to most of the devices. For instance, if it is something like electromagnetic compatibility, this is applicable to all the devices. Okay, so when it comes to medical devices that have an alarm, which means that there is a medical device that gives a signal in the form of an alarm, then this standard is applicable, which is 60601-1-8. Okay, if it is something related to radiation protection devices, something like lead shields, this device is applicable, 60601-1-3. Okay, so when your device is used in a home healthcare environment, for instance, if it is a pulse oximeter which is intended for used in a home environment, then this standard is applicable, which is 60601-1-11. Okay. In addition to that, there are some standards called as particular standards, which is specific to a medical device. Okay. If it is an infusion pump, then 60601-2-24. This is applicable as a vertical standard or a particular standard. Okay, so likewise, depending upon the nature of the electromedical device, there are specific electrical standards that could apply. That is called as product specific standards. In addition to that, we have something called as process or quality standards, which means that, for instance, when we take ISO 13485, it is called as a process standard. Then ISO 14971, it is also called as a process standard, because these type of standards, it focuses on how the medical devices developed, manufactured, and maintained. Okay, so when it comes to the last one, which is labeling requirements. Okay, so whenever we develop a medical device, usually this type of labeling, it tells how to use the medical device safely and what is the intended purpose of the medical device and what are all the risks that needs to be avoided. Okay, so whenever we take a medical device, you can see here the one that I have highlighted. Okay, you can see that they have provided the brand name of the medical device. Then they also provided the expiration date of the medical device. Then they have also provided some information related to the lot number and the product identifier. In addition to that, they have also provided information related to the name of the manufacturer. Then what are all the precautions that needs to be taken care while the storage and handling of the medical device. Okay, so usually these type of labeling requirements, it is covered under the standard ISO 15223 series of standards. And in the next slide, you can see some of the standard symbols that is used on medical device labels and packaging, which means that the general, it says that this is a medical device, and this date, it mentions the expiry date of the medical device. Then when it comes to sterilization, they say that what is the type of sterilization used in the medical device. Then they say that what is the model number of the medical device, country of manufacture, So these are some of the labelings which are associated in the medical device labels and packaging. Okay. So in addition to that, there are also specific regulations to software as a medical device and cyber security considerations associated with the medical device. Okay, so when we are considering something like software as a medical device, this could be a software that could come along with the medical device, or a standalone software that could be performing the function of diagnosing, monitoring, and treating a specific condition. Okay, so usually these type of software as a medical device, this could run on phones, tablets, and computers, and or the cloud. Okay, so one of the examples for software as a medical device, there could be an artificial intelligence tool that reads the X-rays and give some information about the pathological condition of bones. Okay, so that could be considered as software as a medical device. Okay, in addition to that, some of the regulations that are associated with regulations and standards associated with software as a medical device include IEC 62304 and ISO 14971. So basically, this is something like a software development standard which is used for medical devices which performs the function of software. Okay, so when it comes to framework for medical device compliance related to software, this IEC 62304, it is the basic requirement. Okay, then when it comes to the other things, if your software is something embedded into a electrical medical device, then IEC 60601 requirements comes into the picture. In addition to that, this IEC 82304 also come into the picture. This is usually a product specific standard. When it comes to IEC 62304, this is a process related standard, while IEC 82304 is a product specific standard. Okay, so now a question will come. We all have some sort of a software that interfaces with the sensor, collects the signal, and gives it to some sort of a give the data to the software that makes some sort of a prognosis. Okay, so this is considered as software in a medical device. Okay, so these are some of the processes associated with software as a medical device. And as a medical device manufacturer or as a researcher, when you want to put medical device into the market, you need to have a quality management system. First, you have to check whether the device qualifies as a medical device based on the intended use, and you need to have some sort of a quality management system which basically documents how the medical device is manufactured. In addition to that, you need to have design controls, how the device is reiterated from the user requirements to the end medical device. Then when it comes to essential safety and performance requirements, if the device is coming in contact with the human body, you need to perform biocompatibility measurements. Then if it is an electromedical device, then it has to be in compliant with IEC 60601 series of standards. And if your device is software as a medical device, then it has to be in compliant with IEC 62304. Okay, so basically what you do is you put all the documents in place, you prepare a dossier based upon the geography, then you submit it to the health agency for their review. And once the health agency or the regulator is satisfied with your documentation, they will give approval for your medical devices. Okay, so this is a short presentation on the regulatory controls associated with the approval for medical devices. Okay, so since for in the interest of time, I would like to end my presentation here. And if the audience, if they have any queries from the participants, I would be happy to answer those queries. So participants, please let me know if you have any queries. I would be happy to answer your queries. Hello.
Thank you, sir. So if there are no queries, we can wind up the session.
Okay. Many thanks for the opportunity, and I would like to thank all the participants for their patience.
Thank you, sir. So I'd like to express a deep appreciation to Dr. Anand for sharing such rich insights and expertise with us. Your session has been both informative and inspiring, and we are grateful for this time and effort you are invested in being with us today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you all. Have a nice evening.
So I also thank all the participants for their active involvement in the successful completion of day 3 of the program. We shared insightful knowledge. I hope many more will follow when I request the same strength to enrich all subsequent sessions together. Meet tomorrow. Thank you.